Welcome everybody to the first episode of React Native podcast that we are hosting at Callstack. Today with me is the first special guest, Mike P, who works with me at Callstack. So just to break the ice, Mike, if you could tell us a bit more about yourself and what are you doing at Callstack?
Hey, I'm Michał. I work as a software developer and a team leader here at Callstack. On a daily basis, I develop React Native apps for our clients and a few open source libraries like React Native Testing Library, Snapshot Div, Jest, React Native CLI, and probably a bunch of others. Guess that's it.
Cool. Thanks for doing that. Am I right that you're wearing a either Jest or Hacktoberfest T-shirt right now?
No, this is Hacktoberfest. Yeah.
There you go. So you're also very into open source, and the reason I'm bringing up Jest T-shirt is that we are also doing a lot of contributions to that library. In fact, I think ever since I met you. That was one of the reasons why we met, and I if I remember correctly, you were actually wearing Just T-shirt the first time we met, so that's how how it all started. So interesting insight. Anyway, now that we are talking about Jest, I think one thing that is very special and special about you is that you are very into testing. And every time we talk about testing here at Callstack, you seem to speak up and bring a lot of great insights. So tell me a bit more about that. Where is the passion to testing coming from? Because I think that it's not that popular topic amongst us. We prefer to write and just release and ship it and forget, but you are always the one who's reminding us that we should test it all. So where it all started? What's the story behind that?
Yeah, so it started by accident, actually. So I started to follow a bunch of people on Twitter, and somebody encouraged like new contributions to a few open source libraries, and it turned out that one of them is Jest, and it was like almost just rewritten to be usable by Christoph Nakazawa, and somehow it turned out that I started to contribute to this library, and that's what I got interested into testing, right? Because I was kind of ashamed that prior to those first contributions, I didn't test my software. And I heard that you should write tests, like unit integration tests. Backend developers do it all the time. And when it comes to front-end development, it's kind of sticky, slippery topic, right? So not too many people knew at the time how to efficiently test software. These are JavaScript, some interactions, then React. So that's how I got like gradually interested into the topic, and that's basically it.
Yeah, I think that I'm one of these developers that you're talking about because ever since I remember, I always had problems differentiating end-to-end tests from, black box tests, integration tests, and all these kind of things. I guess the only piece of testing that I really mastered when I was just starting was unit tests, because that was the easiest thing to do. But rather than that, I think that working with you, I actually learned a lot about these things. So that was awesome. Cool. So I getting a bit more to the topic of today's podcast, which is a React Native testing library. It is a utility for testing React Native apps that you've been working on. So I think you are the best person to tell everybody listening to us what is this library doing and what is the use case for it. So if we could just start with a very brief introduction to how it all started and why I should choose that library from amongst all the others that exist in the ecosystem.
Yeah, so maybe let's start what the React Native Testing Library is. So
yeah,
If you're familiar with React testing library or DOM testing library or other testing libraries started by Kent, C Dots, then React Native testing library is like re-implementation of the same APIs in the React Native realm. So the difference is that our library is not dependent on DOM APIs because we don't run React Native in DOM. We run in JavaScript environment with some special functions, but it's pretty far away from DOM, right? So we render into custom Node.js environment, and to do that, we as an implementation detail of the library, we don't use the JavaScript DOM implementations, but rather use React Test Render to do the stuff for us. And because we realized that using React Test Renderer is like the experience is not so great. Like you have to wrap everything in Act. You have to manipulate the instances. You can access some basically implementation details of a component. So it was like doing one of the projects when we were writing tests for one of our clients. We realized that it's really cumbersome to use this, and we also didn't want to use Enzyme because it kind of encouraged you to write tests that assert on implementation details. For example, change the state of the component, and at the time there was really close to like React was really close to release React hooks, and it turned out that all of those tests written in Enzyme would have to be rewritten, for example. So we came up with our own set of helpers, and React as a library came out at a few months later, if I remember correctly. So we got inspired by their APIs and kind of re-implemented this. So that's the story behind the library. We try to be as compatible with the rest of the ecosystem, the rest of the libraries as possible. But historically, we started from a different place, and kind of we're just getting into this compatibility. So we had some APIs that were, as we mark them today, unsafe, or we allowed for shallow rendering, for example. So it took us time to gradually migrate off of those APIs, and today we can say that we're almost compatible with like as much as we can, basically. So the goal is if you test your React apps with React as a library, you should be able to seamlessly go to React Native and use a different library, but with the same habits, same helpers, and same ecosystem.
Okay, so if I'm getting this right, the idea with the library is to focus on not testing the internals and not depending on what's inside, but rather using those APIs that we refer to as queries for doing things.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's basically it. Our one of the main goals of the library is to make it very hard to assert on the implementation details of the React components that you test. So we want to be as close to the user interactions and user experience as possible. So the queries are they allow you to find elements on your screen by text or by some accessibility helpers or input values, but you're not allowed to manually change the state of your component or grab some, I don't know, find a specific prop of a component and or find it by a name and kind of get away with that with your writing test. So we want our tests to resemble how the user is actually using the app. So so that's the main goal, and the rest is like the whole API is a reflection of this idea.
Okay, cool. So I understand. So that makes a lot of sense, and I guess just to clear it up, because you mentioned the two alternatives that are available were the Enzyme and React Test Renderer. So I guess the difference from the first one was the shallow versus deep rendering. Did I get this right?
So not exactly. So
Okay.
Enzyme is it's a really good library, right? So it's pretty versatile. You can write your unit tests by shallow rendering stuff. You can you can render deeply into the DOM structure, DOM hierarchy. So you can do a lot, and the problem is that you probably can do too much, right? So that was the problem with Enzyme, and it turned out that the developers and the community around Enzyme started to exploit some unsafe testing patterns that in the future they made it harder for you to, for example, refactor your code structurally when you were migrating from React classes to hooks to functions, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So that's about it. I won't say that Enzyme is a bad library. It just allows for too much, and our idea is to not allow for developers to do anything, but just enough to be productive of writing tests.
And I think this was this is also something that you share with the testing library itself. I think when Kant open sourced this whole concept, because I think testing library is more of a concept, it was more like a paradigm for testing in general, with specific implementations, right? Do you know like what were the core principles of that pattern, of that approach? I think the one that you said, which is not rely on the internals, was the one thing. Is there anything else that Kant and the whole testing library community truly believes in?
Yeah. So the testing library, it's an organization on GitHub, for example. So there's a whole community around it, and they believe that your tests should resemble the way your user uses your app, and that's it. And this determines the like inability to test implementation details, and the API that's more resembling end-to-end testing frameworks, where you can click, send an event, find something by text. This is not a regular unit testing. It's like the API evolved in a way that you're writing your queries as you would be a user that want to achieve some specific goal or go through a specific flow of the application, but you're still rendered in the emulated JavaScript environment. So you don't have to pay the cost of running emulator or a browser or anything like this.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think this is why it is just much easier and faster to set it up compared to alternatives such as Detox, I guess, which is also the library that you had a lot of experience with, if I recall.
I won't say I have I have a lot of experience with Detox. I have just enough to be productive, right?
Oh yeah.
And Detox is a completely different library. It's end-to-end testing or UI testing or functional, however you like to call it. The thing is that we shouldn't write too much of or too many of the end-to-end tests because of their qualities, right? They serve as really nice indication that our app actually works from end to end, involving our front end, back end databases, transport layers, and all of that. So that's the great thing about end-to-end testing, and Detox allow us to do so. But it's also a shortcoming, right? So
Yeah.
because you have
Yeah.
so many systems involved, a lot more can go wrong, basically, right?
Yeah, we've been running Detox on the React Native repo, and every time I've been working on the release, I understand that they can go wrong from time to time. So if you are looking for something 100% stable, this might not be the best option. Which is not the Detox fault itself; it's just how the things work these days. Cool.
Yeah, that's actually pretty nice that React Native is using a community library like Detox to test their app end to end. Yeah, I heard it's really fun stuff to do to resolve the Detox errors.
Yeah. Well, it is not something that I usually do. I just report stuff, so I'm on this easier side of things, just testing. But yeah, you're right. And the good thing though about this is that every time we upgrade React Native to a newer version, we can make sure that Detox works, which historically been a problem because there were some breaking changes, and it's been tough from time to time. But the Detox team's been doing a great job, so kudos on that for them. Cool, Mike. So how about you kind of maybe give us a quick run through some examples that you have in the docs, and maybe show us how these things work in practice. I got a brief understanding of what's going on about this React Native testing library, but because I'm more of a CTO/manager kind of guy these days, this kind of run through the docs will be a good for me and for those of our listeners that haven't used this library before. So how about doing a quick demo of the library?
Yeah, so this is our website. It's rendered. I mean, it's hosted on the GitHub pages. We built it with Docusaurus library from our main repository, and I must say it's really a pleasure to work with Docusaurus. There is almost no hacking we need to do to be happy about, and it supports dark mode. So
there you go. That's a nice touch.
So yeah, these are like the goals of the library, that we want our tests to be maintainable, reliable, and the library is community driven.
Yeah. I'd love my tests to be community driven though.
Yeah. So Callstack is like one of the leading companies in the React Native ecosystem, and we are proud that we can support so many libraries, and React Native testing library is one of them. So want to make sure that that people see that the developers realize that the same people that work on other React Native libraries also work on their testing libraries. So I think that's nice. And here we have some introduction. If you're new to the library, this is some contrived example. I can go through it. We can import like render and fire event helpers from the React Native testing library. We import our test components. We write the tests. We set up some data, some mocks, and this is a crucial part. We render our component. It's we pass it some props that we want to test on, our mocks if you want to test on subnet, and once it's rendered, it returns an object with a bunch of helpers and how we call them queries. So those queries are like this one, get by accessibility label. So we can find a specific accessibility label in the view hierarchy, or we can find something by text. And once we have those queries selected, we can call them with specific inputs. So here we, for example, want to find answer input by accessibility label because we know it's a thing, and if there's a person with if there's a user with a voiceover or similar technology using our app, we can be sure that our like this part of our app is accessible, and we embrace that in tests. So it's sometimes hard to figure out how to grab something interactable or an image or so, and then it turns out that our non-visual users also have those problems. So by focusing on restricting this API, we try to make developers think about their accessibility in their apps. So now we have grabbed our inputs, and we can fire some events. Like we can change the text inside the input because the input can have the unchanged text prop that it respects when the user input is inserted, and so we can use fire event to emulate that. We can emulate any event, but there are three events that we make it that are like
predefined.
Yeah. Like we how to nicely say it. Yeah, they're like baked into
hard coded.
So those events are the ones that users are using, are most likely using, which is change text, which is pressing, and scrolling. So we can, as you can see, we find an instance that was found by the query, and we can make another query to get this instance. Like in this case, we look for submit text into inside our view hierarchy and press it as the user would do, and then we check if our unsubmit was called with specific data, right?
So just one question. Actually, I got a lot of them, but need to make sure we fit in time. So I can see that there is two kinds of functions that we work with. Some of them are coming from the React Native Testing Library namespace, and they seem to be like global functions. And we also have some like an object with those queries returned from render function, and these are scoped, let's say, to the component itself, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense. So my next question was like, what are all the queries that I should be aware of, apart from get by text and get all by accessibility label? I'm not sure if that's what you were. I'm pretty sure that that's what you were going to talk about anyway, but just wanted to bring that up.
So we have a handful of methods here, and render is the most important of them. We just got to know it when we got through that basic example.
Yeah.
We have cleanup that's being called automatically, so you don't ever have to think about it. It unmounts your components, so your data from your components does not leak to another test. We have fire event. We also know that already. There's a bunch of predefined fire events like compress, change text, scroll. We have wait for, which is handful. If we want to wait for some non-deterministic periods of time until an element appears or times out. And so this can be element appearing in our view hierarchy or basically anything else. This is
so if I have generic. If I have something async going on, this is what I should probably use to just wait for it to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there are better ways to do it. So wait for is also this is API that you probably not need to use too often, at least. Okay. There's wait for element to be removed, which is the opposite of the wait for. It's helpful to test if something disappeared from the screen, for example, after some animation is done. Or so. We have a within. This is pretty interesting one. Once you render your component and have the queries available, it may happen that the component is so big that you want to scope the those queries to some smaller chunk of that component. So within is basically this. It will it takes an instance that you just took and that you just found, for example, with another query, and you can search inside
okay, cool.
this new instance. So and it only return queries. So the some other methods returned by render are not available here. Just
makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And then we have a query and query all APIs. This is stuff returned from render, and we have act, which is a helper from the React's render, and it's re-exported almost directly. We support synchronous and asynchronous version of act. And yeah, we can go back to the render, and the interesting thing is this queries, right? So we know that we can return some queries that will allow us to get grab stuff by text or by accessibility. We'll get to the list of them soon. And the render also returns a few other helpers scoped to this very component that we are rendering. For example, update or alias re-render, which will re-render our component if you want to test mounting and unmounting, for example. We can unmount a component. Yeah, that was wrong. Re-render will just re-render, it won't unmount. Yeah, sorry about that. So for mount, we have another options. We have a debug that will return a shallow or deep hierarchy pre-printed in our console, and we have the JSON, which will return the JSON hierarchy of our view that we just rendered, and this may be helpful for some snapshot testing.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought when you said JSON. I was like, snapshot testing is going to be the way to go.
Yeah.
Cool.
So we can jump to queries, and queries have a few variants, right? So those variants are get, query, and find. And the difference is that they all allow you to do the same. They allow you to use those queries which work, which grab the React test instances by text or by placeholder, test ID, accessibility label, and such. But they behave a bit differently in terms of throwing of what's happening when a specific instance is found or not. So get by and get all by will return a query, will return a test instance of what we want to find, and if it doesn't find anything that's matching the query, it will throw an error. That's important stuff, and similar is for the get all by. It will return an array of matching nodes for a query and throw an error if there's no element match. So query is just like get by, but it won't throw, it will return null. And it's also convenient to use sometimes if we want to see if an element doesn't exist in the hierarchy, and we don't want to play with catching the error and such. Query all by the same, but with multiple items. If there's no items found, it will return an empty array. And find by is a convenience wrapper around the get by, plus it's running wait for underneath. So it's an asynchronous query that we believe you should be using most of the time, because it's very convenient. There's a lot of asynchronous stuff happening when rendering our views and our components. So instead of using wait for directly, we can use await find by some query, and it will wait for an element to appear, for example, or a bunch of elements to appear in our hierarchy, so we don't ever have to think about asynchronity in our apps. It's very nice upgrade from using get by and query by and plus wait for. And the good thing that the library is doing for you, as I mentioned about this act, is that whenever we render or update or wait for an element, we wrap those updates in act for you. So there's only a bunch of scenarios where you actually need to use act directly. Most of the time, you don't ever have to think about it.
Okay, and what does this act function itself is doing, or is supposed to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so act is a helper from the React test renderer that makes your test behave, makes React behave more similar to the browser environment in your testing environment. So what they mean by that is React can, for example, batch multiple state updates in a one update, for example. So they can do it probably in concurrent mode. They can add it sooner or later, and when they dispatch, because they have synthetic event implementation, they can do a bunch of crazy and less crazy optimizations to how the events are passed to the browser. So they can pass them directly or batch them in multiple groups. So the act is a way to preserve this behavior inside node environment. So whenever you're trying to update state of your component and don't use act to and don't wrap the state update inside the act helper, React test renderer will yell at you that you didn't wrap your state update. Just do it, right? So so our library does it for you. So you almost never have to think about it. But there are times where those warnings will still happen. But it's not a shortcoming of the library. It's React core team preventing you from doing some silly errors that you may have not thought about it, for example.
Yeah. All right, Mike. So thanks for doing that deep dive into the API. That was very insightful. There is one question that I wanted to ask you, and I know that you love this question. And the question is, how is React Native testing library different from something that I've heard, native testing library, which is actually listed on the testing library website? What's the story behind that? Why that change, and can we expect anything to happen around that?
Yeah, so every time we release a new version of the library, we get asked the same questions. Why did we ended up having two libraries doing exactly the same? So the thing number one is that they are not the same. They have the same APIs, or very similar at least. They work differently under the hood, and our library was the first one to come up as an open source library. And this native testing library, which is renamed as an official testing library / React Native, was created a bit later, and it was actually created like behind our backs. We didn't like this situation. We had some offline conversations with Kent and the creator of the library, that this is not an optimal situation for our community. But in the end, we didn't come up with the agreement on what to do in this situation. So we kept the status quo by having two libraries. So the official one is not our library, but our library is as we already as we say it on the documentation, is community driven, and specifically React Native community driven, and developed by Callstack, which invests a lot into making this library usable and easy to maintain. And the maintainability is the biggest difference between those libraries. So our idea is to have a thinnest possible abstraction layer on top over the React test renderer, and not introducing any hacks specific to React Native. So some React Native APIs that or actually React Native mocks that are let's say not ideally re-implemented inside JavaScript from their native components. We don't do anything to fix them, right? We believe that they should be fixed upstream, while the other library tries to fix stuff that React Native mocks break, for example.
Okay,
so that's the biggest difference, and it allows us to move really fast to be compatible with any version of React Native, while the second library has currently issues with the maintenance, and that's because the way they wanted to deal with problems that were in our opinion, not a responsibility of a testing library, but React Native itself.
I see.
So that's how it looks today, and but there is actually some bright future ahead of us, because with the one other difference between our libraries is that we in our version 1 allowed for shallow rendering or introduced some unsafe queries that were not aligned with the guiding principles of testing library.
I guess that was one of those problems between like testing
Yes.
library 1 and 2.
Yeah, and the thing is that we couldn't migrate off of those APIs too fast and just break everybody, because there were already a lot of users, including our clients, that were using this library. So we couldn't afford to break everything, so that we're now officially compatible with the guiding principles of testing library.
Nice.
So we've came up with a long plan on how to address all of those issues, and that's how we came up with V2, which got released a few weeks ago. And V2 is fairly easy to upgrade from the V1. We've prepared a thorough migration guide, blog post with rationale behind our decisions. And with this version, we are practically compatible with other testing libraries, with their APIs. We made sure that the React Native testing library is compatible with also some community libraries around ESLint or custom jest matchers. So we did a lot of work that was incremental and allow everybody to upgrade seamlessly, or at least we hope so, that it's a seamless upgrade. We didn't see too many issues when upgrading our internal apps or our clients' apps, and also it's been a few weeks already since the release of V2, and we didn't have any like issues created around the paying for upgrading. So we read this as a small success that we managed to remove or at least rename some of the dangerous APIs and allow for gradual upgrade to our users. And this was it seems like this was also assigned to Kent, the creator of testing libraries, that maybe it's time to do something about those the split inside the community, that we have two libraries for testing React Native, and we're actually like right now we have like almost clear path to resolve this situation, and in the nearest future our library will hopefully become the library to test React Native, and the second one will be phased out, and the missing parts is that we need to come up with a good migration strategy, which shouldn't be problematic because the APIs are the same. But we wanna make it as easy for the community as possible. And this is actually very, very exciting that after all this time, after having two libraries doing the same, we end up like joining them and have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, yeah. I guess it's good to see some positive feedback coming out of healthy competition happening inside the community with two libraries trying to kind of become the de facto standard for testing. So it's good to see that. I'm really excited about that because I know that you've been spending a lot of your time and energy into kind of doing that, and because you're passionate about testing, you're like fully immersed by the library. So you mentioned already that the V2 is the library is the version where you're finally compatible with the guiding principles, and that's one thing. So I just wanted to ask if there is anything that you wanted to highlight as far as V2, if there is anybody listening to us that been using V1. I guess it might be worth to just quickly glance for the most important changes, and if there is anything that you wanted to highlight, please do. I'm really curious about what's inside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. So we introduced a bunch of upgrades and cleanups inside V2, but they were like some of them were only like maintenance wise, which is, for example, dropping Node 8 that reached end of life with the end of 2019.
Yeah.
And we also removed, I'll just go one by one. We've introduced a automatic cleanup, which also
Nice.
works the same in the React testing library. It's even more important there because it also cleans up the DOM state. We don't use DOM, so we only unmount the component, and we use the same APIs to as the React testing library to enable or disable this behavior. So that's one of the compatibility changes. Another one is wait for API changes. The signature of and the name of our wait for element function was a bit different. So we've made it that it's exactly the same as the testing library. So it's renamed to wait for.
Yeah.
It has options object, fairly trivial upgrade. There's not too many users that tweak those options anyway. So it's 90% of changes is just rename wait for element to wait for.
Yeah.
Also, another like productivity and ease of use upgrade is that we now wrap wait for calls inside Act, so we don't have to think about it. And we also in the last version of version 1, we introduced the find by, which was also missing from our API. So we removed the global debug function. This was something that we introduced in the very first version, and then it turned out that it's easier to use debug directly from the rendered component because we are usually interested in that. So we removed the legacy helper. We removed the shallow function, which was a very simple implementation. So if anybody wants to use shallow rendering, and there are some justifications to use it if you're heavily invested into unit testing, like very unit testing of your React components. But the thing is that those components need to be super simple, and if you add state to it, you may have troubles with difference between shallow and deep rendering. So we generally discourage from using that. That's why we removed it. But yeah, if you use shallow in your test, you can re-implement it with this few lines of code and migrate off of this API later. We removed
Nice.
a
lot of
some
functions.
other. Yeah, I mean just we removed one query, which is by name. It was
All right.
it was a mistake from the very beginning, but we actually used this API in some of the other apps. So we deprecated it like a year ago, and we spawned warnings for that, and now it's completely removed. So if you relied on get by name, I mean you already been warned, and now it's just impossible to use it. It's very easy to replace it with get by type, which was also renamed to be unsafe get by type, and the unsafe, as we call them, queries are getting by type and getting by props, because they assert on certain implementation details of your components that you want to test integration of. But it's not always a bad thing to do it. That's why we leave those APIs, because we know there are users that successfully test their components or some of the components using those queries. So we just renamed them, and we don't have plans to remove those for now. They're shouting at you that it's unsafe, and you basically need to know what you're doing, because fun fact is that a lot of developers don't know what they're doing when they're testing. They just want to bump their coverage up. So we want to make it as easy for them as possible. So to not be an expert in testing, just to test your React components. We fixed a long-standing bug in the get by test ID query. So this may be problematic in some cases. The details are here. You can read them if you hit those edge cases. And we've deprecated and plan to remove the Flash microtask queue. This is very simple helper as a one-liner, and it's usually not necessary to use it. It's better to use find by or wait for. And cool. That's basically it. Apart from those applications, we made sure we're compatible with few community libraries, and this makes us very easy to be super compatible with other testing libraries.
Nice. Thanks for running through those changes. I see that the general pattern here is that you're trying to be focusing on the highest level of testing possible without encouraging people to go deeper and focusing on like flashing microtask queue, etc. Like these are the details that you should not worry about. I see that I like what you said at the beginning, that the React Native testing library focuses on testing the apps the way users interact with it, and users don't care about your task queue or waiting for something. They care about
exactly
the outcome. Cool. Mikey, thanks for joining, and thanks for being the first guest on our podcast.
Yeah, thank you as well.
It's been pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to all the changes that you will be releasing in the future. Again, as I said, I wish you best of luck. These are like really great. This is really great work that you've done and your team done so far, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed for all the great work that you have in plans. And again, thanks for joining, and best of luck with the developments in the React Native testing library.
Yeah, thank you as well. Thanks for inviting me to this podcast. I really look forward for the next episodes. I'm really interested in what you have in store here for this podcast.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Hold on with being excited because I might call you for being a co-host. So,
Yeah,
you
I'm
never
happy
know.
to co-host.
I know. I know you very well. All right, Mike. Yeah, thanks for that. I'll let you know when we are up in the air. And meanwhile, have a nice day. And thanks again for your time here on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.